Excellent. Welcome to our Project 2025 webinar hosted by AIDS United. My name is Christina Adeleke. I currently serve as the Senior Policy Manager for Community Mobilization and Health Equity. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon on a Friday for this important webinar. And I want to say thank you to our speakers today, Matthew Rose, Jose Abrigo, and Jada Hicks, who you'll be hearing from later. Today, as you all know, we'll be talking about Project 2025, what that is, which it is essentially an initiative spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation aimed at preparing for a potential conservative administration in 2025. Their main goals are to reshape the federal government by implementing a comprehensive conservative policy agenda and installing loyal personnel who are trained to carry out this vision. Policy proposals within Project 2025 span various areas, including drastically reducing the size of the federal government, restructuring federal agencies, and reversing policies implemented during Democratic administrations. Some key recommendations, include cutting taxes, scaling back environmental regulations, and imposing stricter immigration controls. There's also an emphasis on conservative social values, which includes rolling back LGBTQ rights, restricting abortion access, and removing certain racial and gender-related topics from school curriculum. You'll hear a lot more specifically about how this Project 2025 proposed agenda will impact our community specifically. And it's important to learn about why, these proposals that you've probably heard so much about, why it is important for our community. When we think specifically around healthcare policy and HIV policy, there are references within Project 2025 that talk about healthcare funding, and social programs. So a lot of the proposed changes that are included will have a direct impact on our community. So it's important for us to be informed and educated about these topics. So I wanted to share with you our learning objectives for today. We'll be hearing from Matthew Rose, who will be sharing and giving us a comprehensive overview of Project 2025 and the areas of focus, including healthcare, LGBTQ rights, civil rights, immigration, and reproductive health. And then we'll be hearing from Jose Abrigo, who will provide an assessment on the legal threats and the actual threats that Project 2025 poses to our community. And then Jada Hicks will close us off with actionable strategies and policy responses to Project 2025 for our community to take note of and be able to mobilize when the time is come. So right now, I will pass it off to Matthew Rose to start our presentation.
Well, thank you. It's always weird to go first in the doom and gloom presentation. So welcome to the doom and the gloom, people. Fitting, as here in DC, we are feeling the weather and it is feeling that way. I have the unenviable task of telling you about where we're going, what I have been thinking of. I've been living in the darkest timeline for the last 3.5 months and figuring out where all the ways that they can go. One of the first things I want to say is a number of things in Project 2025 and ideologically, these things aren't new. This is just the most focused, most comprehensive list of putting all the terrible things together. But we've already been seeing some of these attacks being played out in Congress itself during the appropriations process for the last couple of years and coming out of the mouths of politicians. So we already know that not only do they want to shrink the administrative state, so they want less government to exist, but the government they do want to exist, they want it highly targeted on creating a specific worldview. A worldview that is less expansive, less diverse, less open, less free, less democratic, because all of those things are apparently really bad in a democracy. Who knew? But what we're left with is some really, really scary plans that try to really focus their attacks on several various communities that they believe are at the heart of their issues. And so I'm going to go through a couple of those areas, but definitely leave space for speakers and definitely questions as they come. Feel free to drop questions in the question box. We love a question box on Zoom, but this is really we're going to put everything together. And I'll tell you the other thing about this. Every year there's a presidential cycle, people put together what they think the next administration should do. These people are the ones dumb enough to release that before they actually won the election. And one of the things we learned about Project 2025 in polling, Project 2025 national polling has about a 5 to 7% approval rating. You can get five, you can get 10 people to tell you that aliens are coming tomorrow. So you get a low approval and the number of people think aliens are going to show up the next day and end the universe or take us away, or who knows what they're going to do. But it is deeply unpopular. Their agenda is deeply unpopular, and they've been masking it and other things to make people think that this is not what they're going to do. But make no bones about this, they are literally trying to do it in plain sight. Literally, the person who's a nominee of the Office of Management and Budget is an author on Project 2025. So we know what they're up to. They told us what they're going to do, and now we'll see, can we fight back them doing it? I'm going to talk about some of the areas that we at HRC are majorly concerned with, and that also overlap within the HIV community. I think the first kind of way we've characterized Project 25 is it sits in a couple areas of attacks. First is the criminalization of transgender people. Under Project 2025, trans people should not exist. We should do everything within the power of government, including redefining what is sex, removing anything that acts about gender identity, and just doing everything we can to make it impossible for people to access being able to exist as a trans person in space. We criminalize drugs, we take away treatment options, and it criminalizes identity and identity protections that are based off gender identity. So this is one of their big projects and tactics. They're doing this through HHS, they do this through DOJ, they do it through other law enforcement opportunities, which means not only are you saying you can't exist, but if you exert the right to exist, we will criminalize you. Now, the lawyer can probably tell you a whole lot more about how you actually can't always stop people about saying who they are. There's this whole thing called the First Amendment, but they are going to do the best they can. And where they can't, they're going to shroud it in things like we have religious freedom that says we can discriminate again. It's not us, it's our religion that says you shouldn't exist. And so it's not the government. And so they are going to try to just act like trans people don't exist. And they're going to try to remove them as best they can by removing sexual orientation and gender identity from all data collection efforts, removing it from all program announcements, and anywhere in the government where we see gender identity, they're going to try to take a sledgehammer to. Next, data. Why data? Because if you can't count them, you can't say what's happening to them. They want to get rid of all data related to sexual orientation and gender identity. This is across all federal survey instruments. This includes a lot of the instruments we use in HIV just to know what the hell is going on in our communities and what's happening, and also how we allocate funding based off of this data and data analysis. We can't, because of data, we are able to tell you that there's been a 21% decrease in the number of new diagnoses among Black gay men, well, Black, gay, bisexual, same gender loving, and MSN. I have to add in the MSN for stupid political reasons. But we're able to tell you there was a decrease in that population because of the data elements we're collecting. We lose access to that in a world of Project 2025. Not to mention, we are just getting our hands around data collection about what's happening in the trans community and being able to say that, yes, Black trans women, 1 in 2 of them have a lifetime risk of HIV acquisition. We can start decreasing that because we're able to see year over year what's happening, to count them and to bring that number down. Can't do that in a world where data collection ends. And data collection happens over massive sets of data. We allocated over $1 trillion in federal funding based off of data alone. So removing the LGBTQ experience from data, highly dangerous. Removing it from CDC, even more problematic, being that the most cases that happen are among, I don't know, what, LGBTQ folks? Wow! Thanks. Love the response to public health emergencies. Next, rolling back, we've seen this for a while, is rolling back DEI efforts. And at first we're like, oh, it's only a couple DEI. We haven't had them for long. But anywhere you're trying to get equity or inclusion work, all of that gone. We're sending the presidential executive orders on these things, which removes authorities, removes chief diversity officers in places where we're finally starting to create equity and making programs that say, hey, there's a disparity here. Maybe we should do something about it. I would say, if you look at cisgender women, the lifetime risk for a white woman, white cisgender woman, to get HIV is 1 in 300 and roughly 65. For a black woman is 1 in 36. That is a massive disparity. Massive. And we're not able to do anything about that. We're not able to create any sort of equitable programs that answer that in a world where we can't do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So we got to be able to figure out how do we do and protect some of these things. Uh, and then there's just like the protection route, and then I'm going to give you the really, really sad story, which I call federal funding of health programs. But we have a lot of protections based off of just you existing as a person within the community, and those start going away, or they get rooted out because of religious refusals and religious freedom exemptions. So we lose access to having a legal mechanism to say what you did to me was wrong, and I'm allowed to seek legal recourse against you for it, and either get compensated in some way or have some sort of justice framework applied. Now, justice framework applied is like wishful thinking because, our justice system isn't always great, but at least the system has to say something happened to me and someone has to do something about it. A lot of those protections get rolled back under Project 2025 and get replaced with things that are like really kind of weird. Like, did you know that Project 2025 says that the Department of Health and Human Services should take a position that marriage is only between one biological man and one biological woman, and them plus a child is the only thing that counts as a family. All a little strange, all not how things work in our society. And yet they want to make sure that their worldview is created, protected, and reinforced through problematic policy. Now, the really, really sad thing, despite the last Trump administration, where we taught them over a 7-month period to lay off our healthcare, yeah, they want to come back at it again. They don't like the Affordable Care Act. They don't like the fact that people get health insurance. They don't like the fact that low-income people get health insurance. And they are going to do their best to limit the access to health insurance, either through block grading Medicaid, which says your state gets one chunk of money, and that's all the money you have to spend for the entire year, rather than now, which is where you get a federal match that meets the amount of money you're spending. Or there's a per capita cap, which says you can only spend this much money on an individual, and once you get there, you're done. Hey, guess what people living with HIV need to do? See providers and doctors and have labs done. And when those things get done, they rack up costs. And when you hit that cost, it's kind of like the old days where you just kind of max out of your insurance and you're on your own with the bill. Really problematic when you're talking about a program designed to help low-income people, saying, hey, you have a maximum cost that you're able to spend on you, and then you're on your own. So we think that that could come sometime. It's definitely outlined in the project about what they want to do with that. And we know that they've tried it before and are going to try to come for healthcare reform again. Now, on the good side, they can't do all of this at once. All of this takes time, it takes effort, and there are plenty of places where we're going to be able to stop them, fight back, shape things differently, but we have to know what's out there. We have to know the attacks. And I'll also say, I only just covered some of the health things right now. There are also some of the social drivers of health that get implicated. So they take a lot of attacks on housing and who can get what kind of housing and what housing is available. There are attacks in education, the education space, about what we're allowed to teach. I mean, they still think that we should be banning books because apparently banning books is a hot thing these days. They take assaults in veterans care and what we're able to provide for people, veterans, people in the military. All of these have issues and get implicated in what Project 2025 is trying to do. It is trying to shape a particular worldview. They also take issue with things like PrEP because they think it creates a support of a deviant lifestyle. And so you can see where they're going, how they're trying to go, and they have learned that you can use government. They just want to use government to make their worldview be a thing, and their worldview often excludes the rest of us and creates problematic, painful concerns that are going to create more death, more suffering, more people just not having access to the services that they need, more people disenfranchised from government, which is kind of their goal. They want less of you involved, doing less work and bothering them less so they can live the life that they think everyone should lead, and anyone who doesn't want to live that life should be locked out of the system entirely. So, with all of that, I will stop there and pass it back.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. Real quick, do you want to share, you were mentioning HRC, do you want to share where you work? What the
Oh,
HRC?
yes. My name is Matthew Rose. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Senior Public Policy Advocate at the Human Rights Campaign.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, thank you. Now we're going to go off to Jose.
Thank you so much. So my name's Jose Abrigo. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the HIV project director for Lambda Legal. Lambda Legal is the oldest and largest legal organization dedicated to the civil rights of people living with HIV and LGBTQ folks. We won the first HIV civil rights case back in 1983, and we've been at the center of leading the HIV civil rights fights since then in the courts of law. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Can folks see that? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right. So Matthew did a really great job about speaking about Project 2025 generally, and I really want to focus this portion of the talk on how it would affect our community, specifically in the areas of healthcare, LGBTQ rights, civil rights, immigration, and reproductive healthcare, and how that intersects with the realm of HIV, folks living with HIV and AIDS. Um, so the important thing to remember is that Trump and the other side don't have a nuanced analysis of HIV. It does not, Project 25 specifically does not explicitly target HIV, but the issues that it does target, like Matthew raised, LGBTQ rights, racial justice, reproductive rights, and healthcare generally, because those issues are so interconnected and intersecting with HIV issues, it will affect our community. Um, Intersection is not just an abstract concept. It is a core part of the reality of the world. So what affects one group, for example, the trans community, affects everyone else. What affects reproductive rights affects HIV rights. And we'll just go into depth for that. Um, so I also just want to underscore Project 2025. Technically, President President-elect Trump, oh, I hate to say that, has disclaimed Project 2025. He says he does not accept or plan to implement Project 2025. But as Matthew pointed out, so many people in his administration, upcoming administration, were architects of Project 2025. So at this point, we're guessing. Um, there's no explicit plan, or we can't predict the future. We can generally guess what he's thinking, what the administration is thinking based on Project 2025, based on what he's saying in the public, based on his appointments. But this is mainly speculation at this point, but educated speculation. So some stuff may come to pass, some stuff may not come to pass. It's just things that we should be prepared for. My motto is in Trump 2.0, we need to prepare for the worst and pray that it doesn't happen. All right, so first let's talk about healthcare. The key things about Project 2025 is it basically proposes a major restructuring of federal healthcare agencies like the CDC and the FDA, Health and Human Services in general. Um, and as a result of that restructuring, it will lead to the reduction of HIV prevention and treatment funding. There's also going to be a rollback of protections for marginalized communities and deregulation. Um, and the ultimate impact on the HIV community is limited access to critical care for people. And at the end of my slide, what my organization did is we went through all 500 pages of Project 2025. I specifically excerpted the portions of Project 2025 that speak about healthcare, and so you could see just generally what the plan is. So some things to really look for is the Ryan White program. Um, I'm sure all of us know what Ryan White is. The other side wants less government. This is explicitly said in Project 2025. And so less government means less funding for things like Ryan White. They specifically want to roll back the ACA, so that would include Medicaid expansions. Um, and currently there are threats to prevention programs like EHE, um, access to PrEP, syringe exchange programs, HIV testing and public health campaigns. It's just the threat is that Congress will defund. Um, and by defunding HHS, by defunding the CDC, who do so many amazing things, not always amazing things, but they do great things for the community. They provide they are the cornerstone of HIV healthcare in the country. If those are restructured, if those are restricted, that's going to result in less services for folks living with HIV. Uh, Also, there are calls to um, invest in junk science by the National Institutes of Health. And so that if that could affect HIV research and for development of new treatments and potential cures. It would slow advancements in science and medication generally, and it would just set the community back. Um, Cuts to CDC. We all know what the CDC does for all of us. And as a result, it's just going to be widening healthcare disparities, huge economic consequences, and public health risks. So those are the main things in healthcare. A lot of it is just defunding, restructuring, deregulation of the CDC, HHS, FDA. All right, LGBTQ rights. So many of the in multiple places in Project 2025, they call for the elimination of our identities. They call for the elimination of sexual orientation and gender identity protections in the various laws. Excuse me. Um, and potential for legalized discrimination in healthcare. The right to discriminate based on your religion, basically, which is what the PrEP case is. We don't believe in covering PrEP for we don't believe in paying for insurance that covers PrEP because it violates our religious beliefs. Um, there's also a provision in the Ryan White healthcare guidance to provide gender affirming care. We expect that to be rolled back as well. And like Matthew pointed out, there's this push to make definitions, federal government definitions, heteronormative, marriages between man and a woman with a child, and everything else falling outside of that is the goal is erasure, to remove anti-discrimination protections, um, and just to roll back the inclusive policies that include us into these government programs. Um, So I will say, because I get a lot of questions about this, this isn't explicitly about Project 2025. Just last week, Lambda Legal and ACLU argued United States versus Scrimeti before the Supreme Court. I was lucky enough to be in the Supreme Court when arguments happened. I was not on the disclaimer. This is not Lambda Legal's or ACLU's official position. I was not part of the litigation team. I did support the litigation team throughout this entire process. Um, but as far as trans rights for minors, so the Spermeti case had to do with whether the 21 states that are currently banning gender affirming care for minors can continue to do that. Unfortunately, it looks like the Supreme Court is going to rule that states will have a right to do that. How they're going to do that, I'm not sure, which would give license for Trump to enact the pronouncements of Project 2025 in banning and Trump and trampling over trans rights in general. So just to flag that. I will say, not to end on a pessimistic note, Chase, who argued the case, said, you know, first of all, we're not sure what the outcome, what the court decision will be. There was no surprises coming out of oral arguments. The way the justices asked their questions were what we expected, and it all indicated where they were leaning towards anyway, except for Neil Gorsuch, who was silent the entire time. And he was the one I was watching the most. He had no facial expression, did not ask any questions whatsoever. Um, that was the only surprise. But all the other justices, we knew where they were leaning. And we thought we lost the Bostock case, which was a major civil rights, LGBTQ civil rights case. And we ended up winning. So we don't know what's going to happen. But that being said, the predictions are based on the questioning. We know where the justices are leaning. We know where well, we don't know. We can guess where they're probably going to land. So we should be prepared for that. Um, on the bright side, we just won a case at the Montana Supreme Court. So in Montana, at least, we've been able to preserve gender affirming care for minors that will not be affected by scrimity. Um, so LGBTQ rights, trans rights, and just LGB rights in general, erasure, removal of the protections. And as we know, how this affects HIV, so many people living with HIV identify as LGBTQ, a disproportionate number, and so removal of these protections will add to the uh the um the discrimination that the community faces. It will be harder to access healthcare. The social determinants of health will be worsened, and so this would have a adverse effect to folks living with HIV if these LGBTQ protections are erased or eliminated. Civil rights. All right. So this is specifically in the context of racial discrimination. A lot of government programs require that the government engage in diversity efforts and in diversity education. Top of mind for our community, it's the National Minority AIDS Council. One of the things that Trump wants to do is to remove these diversity initiatives and remove the anti-discrimination protections. How the National Minority AIDS Council is going to operate without talking about race or diversity, I have no idea. Um, so again, the HIV disproportionately affects communities of color, specifically Black communities, and Latina communities. And so the removal of these considerations and these protections at the federal level for people of color would, while not explicitly targeting HIV, would severely impact and undermine the safety and healthcare of our community. I will say Lambda Legal, last time Trump did this, we sued. Basically, last Trump 1.0, he enacted a rule where any federal contractors who receive federal money could not do diversity training or education. Lambda Legal sued, and what a number of the plaintiffs were HIV organizations because so many of our HIV organizations receive federal funding, and we need to engage in these conversations about the importance of HIV, race, healthcare inequities as a result of race, the importance of diversity in the healthcare field. So a lot of our plaintiffs were HIV organizations. We sued the Trump administration. We got a nationwide injunction. As a result, we were able to delay the implementation of that until Biden came into office, and then he rescinded that Trump administration executive order right away. So that's one of the ways that civil rights and HIV are going to be affected. We will probably, for Trump 2.0, please expect me to come knocking on some of your doors to be potential plaintiffs in if Trump does this, if and probably when Trump does this again. But we were able to stop it last time. Immigration. This is the top priority for the Trump administration. Mass deportations, but also just making immigration harder. When Previously, before I was at Lambda Legal, I was the director and supervising attorney of the LGBTQ HIV unit at New York Legal Services, where we represented a lot of asylum seekers. And getting HIV asylum is already hard enough. The bar is so incredibly high. If a person living with HIV wants to come seek asylum on the basis of HIV alone in the United States, that will be even harder under the Trump administration. So folks who are unable to access basic HIV care and from their countries of origin coming to the United States trying to seek asylum on the basis of that will have a higher bar to meet, most likely as a result of Project 2025 in the Trump administration. In addition, oftentimes because the bar was so high and there was a lot of intersections where a lot of our clients who were coming to us with HIV were seeking asylum also identified as LGBTQ, we could also claim LGBTQ persecution as well for asylum cases. That the bar for that's going to be harder. It's just stricter immigration policies and mass deportations in general. There's also the public charge rule that I know was really a big issue for our community in the past. For a lot of HIV positive immigrants who are receiving public benefits, what we found under the public charge rule was it was a chilling effect. So some folks stopped seeking medical treatment, are disenrolled from Medicaid, stopped getting food stamps, uh, because they did not want to be targeted under this public charge rule. The public charge rule basically says that if you're an immigrant to the United States and you enroll in a public benefits program like SNAP, like in a housing with receive a government housing voucher, receive Medicaid, that is a violation of the public charge rule. That's not specific, but generally that's what it said. And a lot of our clients are recent immigrants who need to access Medicaid and housing through through public benefits because that's what they need to do. And so that's another thing to keep an eye out for. Project 2025 um, is going to really target immigration, getting into the country in general, and for current immigrants in the country, it's going to be they're trying to make it harder for them to stay in the country by initiating the public charge rule and just being a lot more strict and more institute more surveillance over the community. Reproductive health care. Reproductive health care is so intertwined with HIV issues. It's mind-boggling. Um, so as we all know, I mean, even though Trump has flip-flopped on access to reproductive health care, Project 2025 has never flip-flopped. It has always said that they have always been against abortion rights in every single case. No exceptions. And how so the attacks on reproductive health care will have collateral consequences on HIV health care. The most the thing that comes first to mind is the Comstock Act. So the Comstock Act was this act passed in like 1886 or some like over 100 years ago that basically said that you cannot mail obscene materials through the postal service. So um, one of the things that the other side is trying to say is let's use the Comstock Act so we could classify the abortion pill or reproductive health care medication that's mailed to someone, um, classify that as obscene and make it illegal for folks to obtain that through the mail. The question is, can they also call can they can does PrEP also fall under the Comstock Act? If they're saying PrEP facilitates gay sex, if PrEP facilitates promiscuity, that could easily also be classified under the Comstock Act and be forbidden to be received through the mail. Um, and also in the umbrella of reproductive health care, it's the elim it's packaged the elimination of sexual health education, which includes HIV education, prevention for women, for prevention for youth, and it's just this domino effect. And so again, the Project 2025 calls on the Secretary of Health and Human Services to promote a right to life and the biological reality of sex, is the main thing that the Project 2025 is asking for. And then finally, at the end of my presentation, if you could, I have a link to my presentation, so you could read this all in depth. What we did was there's a page number, there's a summary, and the exact quote from Project 2025. This is just the section on healthcare alone. So as you can see, there are a lot of sections. So you could take a look for yourselves to see and what you could get prepared for. But my organization did this just for your reference and for folks' ease of access. With that, I am done.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jose, for all of that amazing information. Now we're going to pass it off to Jada. Folks, if you have questions, we're asking folks to go to the Q&A box and to submit your questions there. So please continue to do that. And Jada, I'll pass it off to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jada Hicks. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Positive Justice Project Attorney at the Center for HIV Law and Policy. I just want to start off a little bit about my org. CHLP is an abolitionist legal and policy organization that envisions and works for a world where HIV and other stigmatized health conditions are no longer criminalized, but met with compassion and the resources to thrive. Agnes, if you don't mind highlighting my slides for me at this moment. I know we've heard, as Matthew put it, a lot of doom and gloom, a lot of horrible policies coming down the pipeline. So at this moment, I just want us all to stop collectively and just take a deep breath as we gear up to talk about some strategies and solutions. So we must remain steadfast in our work. An implementation of Project 2025 does not mean that there has to be a seismic shift in our work. We heard a little bit from Matthew about how we've already seen some of these efforts already, right? So there's not going to be a huge shift in our work. Of course, what we work on and what we prioritize in our work may change, but the substance of our work is the same. So we must remain committed to ending the HIV epidemic through education, reducing stigma, harm reduction, and our anti-criminalization reform movement. Remember, our work in and of itself is a form of resistance. And for some of us, our very existence is a form of resistance. We have to keep pressing forward. Now is not the time to panic. We must do everything in our power to quell the rising panic within our community. And next, I want to discuss some actionable strategies and policy responses that our community can adopt to address these threats and mobilize effectively to safeguard our rights and well-being. Next slide, please. So to begin with, engaging diverse stakeholders, we want to build coalitions with advocacy groups, public health organizations, faith communities, and other allies to amplify collective voices. Project 2025 is a white Christian, extremely racist, nationalist agenda. If we want to successfully fight back, we're going to have to bring in unconventional allies and think outside the box. So now's the time for us specifically to call on our faith leaders and bring them to the table. Stigma around HIV is compounded by the moral and ethical narratives propagated within our own communities sometimes. Faith leaders hold significant influence and can either perpetuate harmful stereotypes or serve as powerful allies in combating stigma and advocating for compassionate and evidence-based approaches to HIV. Their role can be pivotal in shaping attitudes and beliefs, especially in Southern states where religious values strongly influence social norms. So there's transformative potential of faith leaders when they collaborate with HIV advocates, public health professionals, and legal experts to reframe narratives from a moral failing to a health matter. So now, more than ever, we need to call on our faith leaders to leverage their platforms to promote understanding, empathy, and scientifically accurate information about HIV to dismantle harmful stereotypes and reduce stigma surrounding HIV. And we have to look for ways to engage faith leaders. So I had the privilege of presenting at the International Stigma Conference on a panel titled Faith to End HIV Criminalization. CHOP also attended an annual faith advocacy and religion symposium hosted by Sister Reach in Tennessee. So there are opportunities to engage with faith leaders. I know that typically that's not an audience that you would think necessarily aligns with our work and our advocacy, but now is the time to call on them and bring them to the table. We also need to call on prosecutors that claim to be quote unquote progressive prosecutors. Prosecutors have broad discretion on whether or not to pursue criminal charges against people living with HIV. The district attorney's office also has the ability to implement internal policies regarding how they evaluate and pursue criminal cases. And so now is the time to really tap into our networks and bring prosecutors to the table. We need to focus on growing our advocacy networks. We have to engage in cross-issue advocacy and expand our reach in terms of who we engage in this work with. Intersectionality is often discussed in a theoretical way, but now we have to put it into practice. This is what it looks like when we put intersectionality into practice. And we should strengthen communication and collaboration among organizations to quickly respond and effectively to emerging challenges. So a great example of growing cross-sectional collaboration is a group called Defending Public Health. This group sprung up back in the COVID pandemic, and it's recently been restarted in order to foster dialogue among various stakeholders, public health experts, epidemiologists, advocates, and organizations to push back on emerging threats to public health and what we're likely to see under the new administration. If anyone's unfamiliar with this group, I'm going to leave my email at the end of the presentation, and there's a form that you can fill out to become a member and get involved directly in that advocacy work. Next slide, please. So we have to continue to engage in grassroots advocacy so that we can empower affected communities through literacy, leadership development, and organizing efforts. We need to amp up educational efforts surrounding Project 2025. Read the plan. I saw someone in the chat asking whether or not you can access the plan and not have to pay for it. Yes, you can. Please make sure to Google it. It is accessible. And if you can't and have the time or the mental capacity and you're fatigued at this moment to read through the plan, please seek out summaries that describe the true goals of Project 2025 and its implementation plan. Attend webinars on the subject, exactly what you're doing today. Continue to show up at these. And there are also a number of published guides that give in-depth analysis of Project 2025 and its aims. Spread the message. Discuss Project 2025 with your peers. We really need to be sounding the alarm as loud as we can. So that means discussing it within our coalition spaces. That means hosting town halls. That means producing and showing up to more webinars like this, where we engage in community to discuss Project 2025. And most importantly, with spreading the message, ask your legislators and policymakers what they're doing to protect our community. I think that is so important. Engage in mutual aid and help one another to stockpile resources. So HIV meds, reproductive care meds such as Plan B, prevention tools, gender-affirming care hormones such as HRT. Identify who can provide and meet those needs. We need to start getting ahead of the ball here, and we need to start stockpiling our resources. Organize protests. It doesn't have to all be about policy. Protests can apply pressure to key decision makers and demonstrate our power to the opposition. But I have to caution, if you're engaging in protests, you have to have a plan. So before attending a protest, make sure you have already discussed a plan for bail, for legal representation if you need it, discuss your security and safety concerns, and whether you'll be contacting some sort of national or local organization to assist you. I also strongly recommend attending a Know Your Rights training. So the National Lawyers Guild is a national nonprofit that provides legal assistance and technical support. NLG provides Know Your Rights trainings, and they also have local chapters. So please check if there is a local chapter in your area. Law for Black Lives, some of you may have heard of L4BL, is a network of nearly 6,000 radical lawyers and legal advocates with the goal of building a legal network that supports Black organizing and Black movements for liberation through community action. And they actually have a form on their website that you can fill out if you want them to conduct a training in your area. In the same vein, make sure that you have secure encrypted messaging and that you are doing everything possible to protect your digital security. Start at the front end. Do not delete incriminating information or try to delete your digital footprint. You need to put these measures in place before any discussions take place. So I want to make sure to say that should be your main focus before you look at doing any sort of protesting. Mariah, I see your comment in the chat about getting a list of these resources. I will be happy to forward that to participants as well. Next slide, please. So looking at legal and policy actionable strategies, we need to leverage relationships with medical, scientific, and public health experts because we need them as allies to speak out. Experts in these fields lend credibility to opposition efforts by basing arguments on sound scientific data and public health principles. Their voices may carry weight with policymakers, the media, and the general public. Moreover, experts can highlight the real-world public health dangers posed by the policies outlined in Project 2025, such as increased stigma, reduced access to healthcare, or setbacks in ending the HIV epidemic. Additionally, we heard Jose talk a little bit about pseudoscience. Experts can directly address and debunk pseudoscience or misleading claims that may be used to justify Project 2025's policies. And this was just reinforcing the importance of evidence-based decision-making. Collect and disseminate data. So use evidence to demonstrate the harms of punitive policies and highlight the benefits of public health approaches when talking to legislators and congressional staff and policymakers. Policymakers often rely on us to educate them when they are crafting or opposing legislation. In my work doing anti-criminalization reform efforts, you wouldn't believe how many people still don't understand how HIV even is transmitted. So that's just a small example. We have to do messaging all the time about spit doesn't transmit. Things that you think people know, they might not know, and we need to educate them in this moment. So we ourselves as community can provide compelling evidence to argue against Project 2025's initiatives and help policymakers understand the real world implications on our community. Promote science-based policies. A lot of us already engage in this state work and advocacy in this way. In these efforts, we must ensure that laws and regulations are informed by the latest scientific advancements and public health best practices. Monitor legislation. Track and analyze proposed laws and policies to identify and combat harmful provisions that could negatively impact people living with HIV. If you don't have the capacity to do yourselves this monitoring of legislation, there are organizations. Equality Federation specifically has a legislation tracker that you can access on their website. And we have to pay special attention to any legislation that may be introduced to attack our trans brothers and sisters. We must do whatever possible to protect trans people from discrimination. We've seen repeated attacks on trans communities, and we've seen a wave of legislation aimed at stripping transgender people of their right to safety, dignity, and autonomy. We have to strongly mobilize to push back against these draconian narratives and legislation. Lobby policymakers at local, state, and federal levels to actively oppose policies that could undermine HIV prevention and treatment initiatives. I also want to point out, look at what we can accomplish at the local level. So what can you get your local doctor or your local health department to do? Next slide, please. CHLP just drafted a model policy on data privacy. So talk to your local doctor, engage with your health department to see if they can put into place a policy based on this model policy. It's designed to provide examples of language that health departments and other agencies and facilities that offer healthcare can use and adopt to promote public health through the protection of private health information. We know that they're going to be increasing surveillance and coming for our data. We have to put these measures in place now. Expand anti-discrimination measures. Strengthen and enforce laws prohibiting discrimination, and this is at the state level, against people living with HIV in employment, healthcare, housing, disability, and other areas. Additionally, state governments can pass non-discrimination laws that include SOGI, so sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination. Next slide, please. Actionable strategies and next slide, I'm sorry. For litigation. So I just want to point out that we should be prepared for legal battles by developing rapid response teams to address urgent and emerging threats posed by Project 2025. And of course, a lot of these are hypothetical, as Jose said. These are just anticipated challenges that we could make. It depends on how Project 2025 is implemented. I expect that we could probably use some First Amendment violations. So we need to challenge restrictions that hinder organizations' ability to provide information on HIV prevention, care, or advocacy as violations of free speech. ADA violations. HIV is a covered disability under the Americans with Disability Act. So the ADA prohibits state and local government entities, as well as private businesses, from discriminating against individuals with disabilities, including people living with HIV, in any of their services, programs, and activities. Challenge policies that exclude people living with HIV from federally funded programs or services, arguing discrimination on the basis of disability, and challenge laws that criminalize people living with HIV based on their positive status. Next slide, please. Preemption challenges. So a preemption challenge is a legal action where one party argues that a law at a lower level of government, like a state law, is invalid because it conflicts with a law at a higher level of government, like a federal law. Essentially, you're going to claim that the higher law preempts the lower law. So this often happens when a state law is challenged as being too strict or different from federal regulations in a particular area. And then a court has to decide whether the federal law intended to occupy all of that regulatory space. We need to be on the lookout for improper rulemaking procedures. So challenge regulations stemming from Project 2025 that bypass public comment periods or fail to meet procedural requirements under the Administrative Procedure Act, APA. So the APA governs federal administrative laws, including rulemaking and adjudication. If an agency fails to comply with public comment period for rulemaking, a court can potentially overturn the rule as arbitrary and capricious if it's challenged, meaning the agency didn't follow proper procedure, and it could be required to restart the rulemaking process, including opening a new public comment period in order to address procedural errors. Amicus briefs. So mobilize public health experts, advocacy organizations, and medical professionals to file and or sign on to amicus briefs supporting challenges to harmful policies. Next slide, please. I think this, in my opinion, might be the most important slide. Elections and elections that we need to pay attention to did not end with the presidential election. We have to pay attention to our other state and local and congressional elections. So midterm elections will be held November 3rd, 2026. During this election, 33 Senate seats and all 435 House seats are up for elections. Keep in mind that the majority party determines who leads important congressional committees, and the president's ability to accomplish his agenda is largely due to which party controls the two houses of Congress. I would say, given the state that we're in, this is a vital midterm election. 36 states hold gubernatorial elections during midterm election years. We need to pay attention to what our governors are proposing as strategies and whether or not they support Project 2025. Judicial elections are more important than ever. When judges rule on cases, they're making case precedent. Research candidates, learn where they stand on the issues. And a reminder that district attorneys are elected officials. Look at how those running for office speak about criminalization and enforcement. This is going to be especially important if there's increased reliance on criminalization under Project 2025. And lastly, school boards. We want to elect people that support race, gender, sexual orientation, and history in our classrooms. We have to educate ourselves on whether those running for school boards oppose censorship and book bans, whether they support teacher autonomy, prevent ideological agendas, and promote equity such as anti-discrimination measures, and whether their support for LGBTQ plus students or protections for Black students and students of color. We have to pay attention to our elections. The last slide is just my contact information with my email. If at any time anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. I'm really responsive with email, and I will turn it back over to Christina. Thank you.
Thank you, Jada. I feel so much more encouraged and empowered. It's a lot of stress to hear a lot of the negativity that, is entailed within Project 2025, but it's heartening to know that we do not have to concede and defeat, and we have tools to be able to push back and fight back, which makes me really excited. We will try to rush as many questions as possible. I know some have been sprinkled in the chat, and thank you for folks who have used the Q&A function. This first question here, I believe it's for Jose. How did you come up with your color codes? Also, any indication which may be like trying to predict the future of what day 1, 2, or 3 executive orders may be?
I came up with the color codes because I was asked to.
I did
Uh,
ask you to do that. I did.
yeah, they're guesses at this point. So like if it was up to me, I would put them all as red. But I tried to be very cognizant about like specifically what does Project 2025 say and limit it to that. And so red is Trump's highest priority that could be actionable. Yellow is something we definitely need to prepare for the worst, watch out for. And there were no greens. So that's the color code.
Yes. All right. This one is for everyone. How do we get those who already don't stand with us to change their minds and stand with us now?
I would say that my little job is doing that. I tell people I used to be a Republican whisperer, although I don't speak MAGA so well. But there is almost always someone not everyone is 100% against you all the time on everything. So it's finding the thing that you can make some common ground on and then move across the time. I don't know if it might be for older folks on the call, but there was a very great evangelical Shepard Smith who hated gay people for most of the 90s and the 2000s. He has come around to not hating them abroad and realizing that they actually need programming in the global aid space, which is a breakthrough. Some of these people do come around, the time horizon is long, but you've got to find something to talk to them about and then slowly draw them to you. But if we can't figure out how to do persuasion, we're not going to win.
And I think another thing is to, I actually highlighted this just the other day in another webinar I was giving because I feel like it really drives the point home. So there's a Republican bill sponsor in Ohio for their reform effort for their criminal law. This sponsor basically has a personal vested interest in seeing that people are not criminalized for the blood and organ donation ban, people living with HIV. Because of that personal connection, we were actually able to get the bill sponsor to take on a much broader reform and try and reform the entire felonious assault statute under which people living with HIV face prosecution there in Ohio. So I think sometimes too, being able to figure out like personal tidbits about your legislators, being able to connect with them, as Matthew said, you might be able to get a tie-in and convince them to do a little bit more than they were even originally coming to the table and discussing with you. So I think that's important now. And I think looking at how they vote on the issues, you can look that up. And I think that's so important for us to go into these conversations educated and informed about our legislators and where they stand on the issues as well.
Excellent, excellent. All right, we're gonna squeeze one more question in, so we may go a little over. So if folks need to hop off, that's totally fine, but I think it's a good question to kind of close on. How can we educate the average person to get them engaged, to realize what can and will affect them and how their action can help? Can we put something together to give to many grassroots groups to go into the communities, each one teach one? Yeah. I mean, I know AU will be working on some resources in the new year. Matthew?
So I think it comes back to persuasion, but part of it is you just have to, we got to get out there and tell our stories and tell our stories in unexpected spaces. How many of you have sat down and told your friend group why you do this work? And not just like, oh, it's World AIDS Day, so I'm telling you why I do this work, but like randomly on a Friday over chicken wings, like, here's why I do this work, and here's why it's important to me, and here's why I need you to care like 2%. I don't need you to be an AIDS activist, but I do need you from time to time to pick up a number and do a 2% action for me. And for a lot of people, that's where it comes. It's that deep work that we have to do and get back to explaining to people. And one of the things I will give you hope in is that our community has come back from worse. When we started this epidemic, we were in a worse position than we're in going into Project 2025. The fact that we have infrastructure at all is a testament to what this community has done and can do. And so we should believe in that power, knowing we've done that before. It's going to take a lot of work, but it can be done again.
I'll just quickly say, please tell stories. We need, like Matthew said, we need to start changing hearts and minds because the other side is controlling the narrative now, especially with trans issues, especially with HIV issues. We need people to step up and start changing the natural zeitgeist, and no longer demonizing who we are. So that is my takeaway.
Yes, we got to reclaim our narrative back. Absolutely. A huge, huge thank you to Matthew, Jose, Jada. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your treasure with us. Stay tuned for more trainings as new developments occur, to keep y'all informed as to what's going on and how it's going to impact our community. I want to quickly plug that AIDS Watch, which is an opportunity coming up in March 31st, where you can come to DC and help advocate for the community as well. And we also have another resource that just went live on AIDS United University, which is called Let's Talk About Gender, which helps educate providers and anyone that will want to learn more about gender and trans issues. Feel free to share that resource with others. That way they can, learn more. And I think that that's something that came up in the chat, how to be able to share information that we've learned and educate our community. This is one of those resources and it's free. So please take advantage of that. And all right, any other plugs that we need to make, Agnes?
That sounds perfect. Both of those things that were mentioned by Christina, my colleague, you can find them on our website right now, ageunited.org. thank you all for joining us, and don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms at Age United. Thank you.
Thank you.